White passenger attempts to take black woman's seat, then learns. Her mother owns the airline. The terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport was its usual busy self. The dull roar of overhead announcements, the rhythmic tapping of shoes on tile, the constant whir of luggage wheels, and the fragrant undercurrent of coffee brewing from the nearby cafe. Jamila could feel the weight of the past few weeks lifting off her shoulders as she walked through the terminal. The social justice conference in New York had been both a success and exhausting. Her mind buzzed with ideas, conversations, and theories about racial equity, justice in the workplace, and the future of activism. As she stepped into the boarding area for her flight back home to Atlanta, she felt a brief moment of peace. This was her time to breathe. Her seat, 3A, was a window seat. It was a small victory for her, the quiet, uninterrupted moment she could gaze out of the window and finally reflect on her mother's legacy. Ruth Johnson, her mother, had built a multi-million-dollar airline, but she had also raised Jamila to fight for her rights, not just in big ways, but in every moment. Her mother had taught her that her worth was never something someone could take from her. She had instilled a sense of power in Jamila, a power that came from education, experience, and most importantly, knowing your value. When the time came to board, Jamila moved toward her seat, feeling the familiar sense of excitement that came with flying. As she made her way down the aisle, she noticed a man standing by the window seat next to hers. He appeared to be in his 40s, wearing an expensive navy suit with a crisp white shirt. His face looked confident, even smug, and he had a look of someone who was used to getting what they wanted. As Jamila approached, she instinctively glanced down at her ticket and then at the seat number above her. 3A. This was her seat. She stepped forward and put her bag in the overhead compartment, trying not to make eye contact with him. But he noticed her and immediately spoke up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cool and dismissive. "You're in my seat." Jamila paused for a second, confused. "I'm sorry, I'm in 3A, she said, looking up at the ticket in her hand. The man raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with superiority. "No, you're not. I've been flying this route for years, and 3A has always been my seat. You must be mistaken." Jamila could feel the tension in her chest tighten. She had been traveling for years, and this wasn't her first encounter with microaggressions. But there was something different about the way he spoke. His tone wasn't just one of entitlement. It was dripping with the belief that he had the right to occupy this space, that he could demand it because of his position in the world. It was more than just a seating issue. It was a challenge to her very existence in this space. Jamila remained calm, looking at her ticket and then back at him. "I've checked, and this is my seat. I'm sure you're mistaken." The man let out an exaggerated sigh and stepped closer, his body language imposing. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice dropping low. "I'm a regular on this flight. I always sit in 3A. I've been flying this route for years. I don't think you belong in this seat." Jamila felt her heart start to race. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an issue with the airline's booking system. This man had already decided she didn't belong in that seat. He didn't even know her, but he had already made a judgment about her right to be there. She could feel every eye in the cabin turn toward them. Her mind raced through possible responses. Should she make a scene? Should she fight for the seat? Or should she just give in? The thought of having to give in, to let someone push her around again, felt unbearable. She clenched her fists. Jamila took a deep breath and tried to keep her voice steady, but she couldn't keep the sting from her words. "I'm not mistaken, and I do belong here. Please step aside." The man's face reddened slightly. "No, I'm not going to let you just sit here. This is my seat. I'm not moving." The tension in the air thickened. The flight attendants were busy with their final preparations, but no one stepped in. No one said anything. It was as if everyone around them had silently agreed that he was in the right. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to claim something that was rightfully yours? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. What would you do in Jamila's shoes? Jamila Johnson wasn't just any young woman in her 20s. She was the daughter of Ruth Johnson, a powerful businesswoman and social justice advocate. Ruth had built a multi-million-dollar airline from the ground up, starting with nothing but an idea and a burning desire to provide equitable access to air travel. Ruth had faced countless challenges in her life, especially as a black woman in a white-dominated industry. But she never allowed those obstacles to define her. Ruth had always told Jamila, "You're never just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for all the people who are silenced." Jamila had inherited this fierce sense of justice and resilience. Growing up, she had watched her mother navigate the corporate world with grace and determination. Ruth didn't just build an empire, she built a space for people who had been left out of mainstream corporate America. She made sure that people of all backgrounds, races, and experiences had a place in the skies. Jamila had followed her mother's example, going to college, earning her degree, and pursuing a career in social justice and activism. She had always known that her mother's legacy wasn't just about wealth, it was about standing up for what was right, no matter the consequences. Her mother had passed down more than just the tools for business success. She had passed down a belief that their family would always stand strong against the forces that sought to silence them. This belief was engraved in Jamila's psyche every day, especially in moments like this when she was forced to confront the deeply embedded racial biases that still existed in society. Richard, on the other hand, was a man whose entire life had been defined by privilege. Raised in a wealthy Connecticut family, Richard had never once questioned the world he lived in. He had been groomed for success since he was young. A high-paying job in corporate banking had only reinforced his belief that the world owed him something. He had never had to struggle for anything in his life, least of all a seat on a plane. He had always been given respect, and he expected it from everyone. And now, in this moment, he couldn't fathom why this woman, this black woman, was standing in his way. The setting, this particular flight, was more than just a travel experience. It was a microcosm of the world outside. It was a place where wealth, race, and privilege collided. Ruth's airline was meant to provide access, to break down barriers, and to ensure that the playing field was level for everyone. It wasn't just an airline, it was a symbol of Ruth's values. Jamila, growing up surrounded by this, had always felt the weight of her mother's mission. But today, she was forced to confront it head-on in a way she hadn't anticipated. The flight itself, private and exclusive, represented more than just transportation. It represented a society where class and race played a huge role in determining who got to succeed and who didn't. But here, on this plane, those rules weren't meant to apply. Ruth had built this airline for people who had never had a chance, for the people who were always told they didn't belong. And yet, here was Richard, standing in the middle of it, trying to take her seat. As Jamila stood there, confronting this man, she realized that this was her moment to take her mother's lessons to heart. She wasn't just in 3A by accident. She had earned that seat. It didn't matter who Richard was or how many times he'd flown that route. She was going to stand firm, no matter the consequences. Jamila's heart thudded in her chest as she stood in the aisle, the sound of the airplane's hum and the chatter of passengers filling the space around her. The man before her was tall, with sharp features, and an air of superiority that radiated from him like a cold, unseen force. He stood in front of her seat, 3A, his gaze fixed with an unsettling intensity. Jamila instinctively glanced at her boarding pass again, just to confirm. It was 3A. That was her seat. There was no mistaking it. But the man wasn't going to let it go. His voice was smooth but edged with condescension, the type of tone that made it clear he expected things to go his way without any argument. "I'm sorry, but that's my seat," he said, his lips curling into a patronizing smile. Jamila didn't flinch. She remained calm even as her inside screamed in disbelief. Was he serious? Did he really think that just because of who he was, Because of the color of his skin, the suit he wore, and the authority he assumed, he could just take her seat? Did he really think that in this confined space, where she had every right to be, she had to give way to his misguided sense of entitlement? "I'm pretty sure I'm in the right seat," Jamila replied, her voice even but firm. He chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that stung her ears. "No, sweetheart. I'm a frequent flyer on this route. 3A is mine, and you're mistaken. Why don't you take a seat somewhere else?" Her heart began to race as the reality of the situation sank in. It wasn't just about a seat. This man wasn't trying to fix a mistake. He was trying to assert dominance in a subtle yet powerful way, using his privilege to force her into submission. For a moment, the words seemed stuck in her throat. She wanted to snap back, wanted to challenge him in the harshest way possible. But Jamila knew that this wasn't the first time this had happened to her. It wouldn't be the last either. She had been through too many moments like this to count. Times when people assumed she didn't belong in a space simply because of her race, her gender, or her background. No, this was going to be different. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to stand your ground despite the odds? How did you handle it? Share your experiences below. What would you have done if you were in Jamila's shoes? Jamila Johnson wasn't like the women most people would expect to see sitting in a first-class seat. She wasn't some socialite with a platinum credit card or a celebrity jetting off for a weekend getaway. No, Jamila was a force of nature, a woman who had been molded by struggle, experience, and resilience. She was the daughter of Ruth Johnson, a woman who had built an empire from the ground up, not with luck or inheritance, but with sheer grit and a relentless sense of purpose. Ruth Johnson was an icon in the business world. Born into poverty, Ruth had faced barriers that many couldn't even imagine. As a black woman in the 1980s, she had to fight for every inch of success she gained. But Ruth had refused to let the world define her. She had started her airline with a simple but powerful vision: to make air travel accessible, not just to the elite, but to the working class, to people who had never had the opportunity to fly before. She had fought against racial prejudice in the airline industry, knowing that she couldn't just sit back and let discrimination dictate who had access to the skies. Jamila had grown up with her mother's fierce spirit of resilience. From a young age, she had learned that in order to succeed in a world that constantly tried to undermine her, she had to be better. She had to fight for her space. Her mother had made it clear that nothing in life was handed to you. You had to earn it. And while Ruth's empire was built on providing others with the opportunities she had fought for, Jamila understood that sometimes just getting into the room, into the seat, was half the battle. Richard, however, didn't understand any of that. Raised in the cushioned comfort of a wealthy Connecticut family, he had always been afforded every privilege life could offer. His world had been one of private schools, Ivy League universities, and elite circles. He had never been challenged, never had to prove his worth. The idea that someone could question his position, especially a black woman, was foreign to him. He had always been told that the world belonged to people like him. Richard wasn't just a man who felt entitled to a seat on this plane. He was a man who had never had to justify his existence, his space, his worth. To him, Jamila wasn't just an inconvenience in his seat. She was a challenge to his status, and that was something he couldn't accept. This wasn't just any flight. This was a flight on Ruth Johnson's Airline, a company built on the principles of inclusivity, opportunity, and empowerment. Ruth's airline was designed to provide not just a service, but a statement. It was more than an air carrier. It was a reflection of her mission to break down the barriers of class, race, and privilege that so often shaped the travel industry. Ruth had created a company that ensured that anyone, regardless of their background, could have access to luxury, comfort, and most importantly, respect in the skies. Jamila had grown up in this world, surrounded by the values of equality and justice that her mother had instilled in her. Ruth had worked tirelessly to create an airline where passengers were valued for more than just their money, where the focus was on making travel accessible and meaningful for everyone. Jamila had always been proud of her mother's work, but today, on this flight, that pride was about to be tested. The airline wasn't just about the business. It was about the mission. It was about proving that people from all walks of life deserved to be treated with dignity, respect, and fairness. The airplane itself was a reflection of that ethos, a space of equal opportunity, where everyone could rise above their circumstances, if only for a few hours in the air. But Richard's attitude represented the exact opposite. He wasn't interested in fairness or equality. He didn't see the world through the same lens that Jamila did. To him, the world was his, and anyone who dared challenge his authority was, at best, an inconvenience. At worst, a threat. Richard's refusal to back down only intensified Jamila's resolve. She knew that standing her ground now meant something far greater than just this moment. She had faced so many instances where people had tried to strip her of her voice, her space, and her worth. This wasn't just a seating dispute. It was a battle of values. Jamila knew that if she allowed Richard to push her around now, it would mean that everything her mother had fought for, everything Jamila had believed in, would have been for nothing. The flight attendant, noticing the tension rising, approached hesitantly. She was a young woman, no older than Jamila herself, but she clearly sensed the gravity of the situation. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" she asked, trying to diffuse the situation. Richard quickly turned to her, his voice laced with authority. "Yes, there is. This woman is in my seat. I've been flying this route for years, and I'm not going to let her take my place." The flight attendant glanced at Jamila, unsure of what to do. But Jamila wasn't about to let Richard control the narrative. She stood tall, meeting the flight attendant's eyes with unwavering confidence. "I'm in 3A. This is my seat," she said, her tone firm but polite. The tension between them was palpable. The flight attendant, visibly uncomfortable, stepped back, muttering, "Let me check the seating chart," before walking away. Richard's eyes narrowed, his face flushed with frustration. The power dynamics were shifting, and he didn't like it. His entire world had been built on unchallenged dominance, and Jamila's resistance was undermining everything he believed about himself. The minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The flight attendants were in a huddle now, quietly discussing the issue while passengers around them exchanged glances. Jamila's patience was beginning to wear thin. She felt her body tense with every glance, every whisper, every exchange between the flight crew and Richard. He hadn't moved from his position. He still stood in the aisle, blocking her way as though he owned the space. "Why don't you just let it go?" he sneered. "You're making this into something it's not. It's just a seat." But to Jamila, it wasn't just a seat. It was a symbol of the world she lived in. A world where people like Richard believed they had a right to control everything and everyone. It was a symbol of the endless fight for respect, dignity, and equality that she had faced throughout her life. This wasn't just about seating arrangements. It was about something much bigger. It was about identity, power, and justice.